Namaskar, good evening. I am your host, all of you know, I am Padmaja Angar Paddy. On behalf of Poetry India International, I am delighted to welcome you all to our maiden event of Talk on Hungarian Poetry, followed by a poetry reading session. I request Dr. Sigma, the General Secretary of Poetry India International, to formally welcome this August gathering of poets. Over to you, Sigma.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are, but
Yeah.
not visible.
1 second. Hope you can see me. Yeah, fine. Good evening, all of you. And thank you so much for joining Poetry India International Poets Meet. We are all here to celebrate poetry. The decision to call this Poets Meet was made in September. And as we know, we have got lots of poetry schools, poetry groups everywhere. And all these groups focus on the growth of poetry, they appreciate poetry, they celebrate poetry. And about this Poetry India International, president of the group is Mr. Bob DeCosta. He's not here. Unfortunately, he's sick. And we have got senior advisors, Dr. Ramakanta Das and Dr. Jacob Isaac. And vice president of the group is Padmaja Iyengar. And we have got 3 joint secretaries. One is Anjal Priyadarshini. Second is Dr. Adisha Das. And third one is Mr. Gopal Lahiri. And we have got a treasurer, Nancy K. Andrew. So this is the executive board of poetry. This is about Poetry International, India International Executive Board. Now, my role is to welcome you all. On behalf of the whole PII team, I have a great pleasure in welcoming our guest speaker, Dr. Rita Malhotra. Rita ji, welcome. In today's celebration, our main star attraction is our guest poets, Ms. Hema Ravi, Sangeeta Gupta, and so many, Niladri Mahajan, and Dr. Paramita Malik, and so many guest poets, Tushar Kabir, our international poet, but not the least. I welcome our PII members to the program. And I know that our program is live streaming in FB. So welcome all the viewers, all the participants. So without wasting time, let us unfold our programs today. Once again, welcome you all to this wonderful program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sigma. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction of the PII members, as well as you set the tone for this event by giving a brief background about the Poetry India International. Thank you so much. I now request Dr. Ramakant Das, the Chief Advisor of Poetry India International, to please deliver his inaugural address. Over to you, Dr. Ramakant Das. Please unmute Dr. Ramakant Das.
His ID is RK Das, is it?
That's right, that's right.
I've unmuted. He has to also unmute. Yeah.
Thank you, Paddy. Thank you, Paddy.
Welcome, sir.
For giving the floor to me. It has been always a pleasure to be in the midst of such wonderful galaxy of poets. This time the number has increased, and in succeeding days, the number will further increase. So it's also a satisfaction as an advisor of this wonderful group that poets transcending the and within the border are appreciating our endeavor to bring poetry online from time to time. we endeavor to do so in years to come. Before I say anything else, I would like to pray to God for a speedy recovery of our beloved President Bob, and I, on behalf of all my fellow poets and members, pray to God so that when we have the next program, he should be there with us. I don't know what responsibility Paddy has given to discharge right now. I exactly don't know, because what I believe is that as far as a forum like this, where we listen to poetry, we read poetry, we share our poetry, and we share the poetry of others at the same time. It's like poetry and poetry all the way. So that is the crux. That is the crux of such type of program. So I don't know. I would like to thank and welcome our host Paddy, who has been doing it so wonderfully well. And I saw her how she hosted the program in Poetic Prism. So it is always a pleasure listening to her poetry and her anchoring. So now shall I read my poem, Paddy?
Sir, the poetry reading session will follow later. This is only
Then
inauguration by you of the whole event.
okay, as an advisor of PII, it's my pleasure and it's my honor and it's my privilege to inaugurate the second edition of PII online poetry reading session. Over to you, Paddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramakant Das. That was a wonderful inaugural address that you gave, and we are very inspired by your sage and wise words about it's poetry that should pervade this entire event, and that's what we'll be attempting also. Friends, if we carefully think, we'll realize that mathematics and poetry have a correlation somewhere. When we do syllable counts for poetry, or when the rhythm of poetry is constructed and defined, elements of mathematics do come into play, isn't it? While mathematics is all calculations, poetry is not all about calculations, nor is poetry itself calculative, as it is a natural flow of words that along the way follow a metric and rhythmic pattern to give a touch and feel of musicality to poetry. Yet whether it's the tal in music or the dance steps, there is a lot of maths in all of them, right? So here we are. It is truly an honor for us that today we have in our midst a renowned mathematician and a poet, Dr. Rita Malhotra, all the way from New Delhi, who is also a translator, critic, and essayist. She'll now be giving us a talk and a presentation titled Annihilation of a Poet and His Art, a glimpse into Hungarian poetry. But before that, here is a brief introduction to Dr. Rita Malhotra. Dr. Rita Malhotra is a mathematician, poet, essayist, poetry critic, and translator. Former principal, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi, and a postdoctoral fellow, University of Paris. She is currently the president, Poetry Across Cultures, India, World Poetry Ambassador to India, appointed by the World Poetry Canada, Poetry Editor, ARS RTM, and Executive Committee Member, Poetry Society India. Her research papers in mathematics are published in 10 countries, including Sweden, Germany, and South Korea. Dr. Malhotra is a recipient of numerous awards, notably Honorary Diploma of the World Congress of Poets, Distinguished Visionary Poet Award by Writers International Network, Canada, the Romanian government honor for promoting international relations through poetry, World Poetry Almanac Award, Mongolia, and the World International Festival Award, Canada. Besides being translated into 13 languages, she has also authored 13 books that include poetry collections, essays, translated works, etc. An analysis of a poetry constitutes a complete section of a Mumbai University doctoral thesis on ecofeminism. Dr. Rita Malhotra is widely traveled and speaks Hindi, Bengali, English, Punjabi, and French. A few topics of her recently invited talks are poetry as a path to women's empowerment at the Platinum Jubilee Talk, GM University, Odisha. Mind and Matter, intersection of science and poetry at India International Center, New Delhi. Self-expression through poetry at Gagi College, New Delhi. Women in Indian Knowledge Tradition at Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. Over to you, Dr. Rita Malhotra, now for your much awaited talk and presentation on Annihilation of a Poet and His Art, a glimpse into Hungarian poetry. Over to you, Dr. Rita Malhotra.
Thank you so much. Lovely words, and for me 13 is a lucky number. You mentioned 13 twice, I didn't realize that, but thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be with Dr. Das after so much time. We've not spoken for some time, but I had lovely interactions with him and the Bhubaneswar group, and so many new people. It's so lovely to know, and people from Bangladesh. I speak Bengali, by the way, Tusharji. So I am Bengali, I have the wrong surname. So I think I'll begin. Yeah, I'm just trying to share my screen. Please tell me, because I have a PPT through which I will be speaking. Do tell me if it's visible. Yeah, can you see it?
Yeah, very
yes,
well.
It's visible. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think I'll make it full screen. In case there's any problem, please let me know. My phone is right here with me, Srivatsan.
Yes, ma'am. Any help, I'll take care.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
worries.
So a big thank you to Poets India International, because this is a privilege and it's so lovely to be with poets sharing, you know, a poet I'm so passionate about. Why I chose Hungarian poetry, I have been having these conversations with Dr. Sigma. She did ask me to give some suggestions, but I think I'll begin with Rabindranath Tagore. I have grown up on Tagore, being a Bengali. Even before the Hungarians had heard of Rabindranath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore was very much aware of the Hungarian culture. And in fact, I'll take you to this slide where you see, he had been, I think 1926, he was in Hungary at Balaton-Füred, and there is this beautiful promenade named after Tagore. But I think basically Tagore is the symbol of connect between the Indians and Hungarians. Even though the Hungarians didn't know his name, as you see on the slide, that in 1894, in The Glory of Literature, he had already compared the culture of Bengal with the culture of Hungary. Not only that, he found a lot of similarities between the Hungarian writer, romantic writer, More Yokai, and Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, the 19th century Bengali novelist. Now, what happened is, when Tagore won the Nobel Prize, that is the first time, most of the Hungarians heard of him. And why did Tagore become very popular in Hungary? Because his works actually helped the middle-class Hungarians to kind of rediscover universal human values. They thought that after World War I, they had just lost it. They had lost all faith in universal human values, but they felt that it was because of Tagore and his works that it was all restored back to them. Another reason why I chose Hungarian poetry is something very recent. The poet you see on the slide is Gábor Lánckor, Dr. Gábor Lánckor. And it was just a matter of chance that in 2012 and 14, we had done 2 programs with the Hungarian Embassy in Delhi through my humble organization, Poetry Across Cultures. And that is how I got in touch with Professor Margit Kovesh, actually. She teaches Hungarian in Delhi University. And she introduced me to Gabor Lanskar at one of his readings in Delhi. And we got to talk and we exchanged poems. And in 2017, as part of the translators team, I was one of them. We had worked on Gabor's poems, and it came in the form of a book. You see the cover page of the book I have given on the slide. It is called Sound Odyssey. And this is one of the poems of Dr. Gabor that I have chosen here, which I had translated as a final translator. It came to us in literal English, and I think there is a very rich texture to Gabor's poems. So I just read it out to give you a glimpse of a very young Hungarian poet who's actually left his teaching job just for writing's sake. The poem is called Dark Beam, the Apotheosis of Love Fulfilled. But when we read the poem, I mean, we have to literally go into layers of meaning. And here is what he says. Impact events on the moon are observable, even with small range telescopes of visible light, on the precondition that they occur on the night hemisphere or during a total eclipse of the moon, because the glow of the bright hemisphere hides the flashes of even the greatest of them. And this last line where he says that whatever, however big an event it may be, it could be love, it could be anything, but even the biggest of flashes are hidden unless it is on the night hemisphere. There are other interpretations to this poem also. And now I'll move away to the poet who has actually influenced me in such a big way. This is Miklos Radnóti. You would all agree that human life is replete with, happenings, some very extraordinary happenings. And one such extraordinary happening, I would say, was the Holocaust. And one extraordinary legendary poet, a Holocaust poet, was the Jewish Hungarian poet Miklos Radnóti. You see him here. And without batting an eyelid, we can actually put Radnóti on the highest literary pedestal. It is not only, his immense contribution to poetry, it is also the kind of impact that is created, with the choice of very poignant expressions, especially in the bone-chilling poems, which were penned in the last few months of, before he died. So, and he died very young, by the way. You can see that 1909 to 1944. And today, not only the Hungarians, but poets across the world actually treasure his work as an unimpeachable addition to the rich poetic heritage of Hungary. And he and his poetry remained fidel to each other till life was so cruelly and brutally snuffed out of him. I will touch upon that. And of course, his poetry transcends all frontiers, geographical frontiers, traditions, cultures, languages, and his poetic consciousness, as I put here, it actually traverses layer after layer of intellect. This is what Radnóti is. Very sadly, what happened is when Radnóti was born, on that fateful day, his twin brother and his mother both died. And that, became, it haunted him always. And that actually is expressed where he curses himself in this poem by Radnóti called 28 Years. You know what he says? This is not the full poem. I've just chosen some lines from a few of his poems. He curses himself by saying, "Monster I was in my nativity, twin-bearing mother and your murderer. I cried out to the photograph which shone upon my wall like truth. Then you were 28 years old." His mother was 28 when she died. And coming to his initial, inspirations, yes, he was influenced by French poets, some German poets, but there was a Hungarian poet, André Ody, as you see on this slide, who also died quite young. But before I come to André Ody, I would also like to just, about Radnóti's life, how sad his life was. At age 12, he also lost his father. And, he was brought up by, some distant relatives also. And, ultimately he got to study at Szeged University. But even though he had a doctorate in Hungarian and French literature, because of his Jewish heritage, he was not given a job in any of the universities. That is the saddest part. And in those days, if we go back a little bit into history, the Jews were being driven out of Budapest. That is why he could not study in Budapest, even though he lived there. So he was sent to Szeged for his higher studies. Coming to Andre Audi, I have chosen a few lines from one of his poems also, because he's one of the greatest lyric poets of Hungary. And why, he had a lot of, he wrote a lot of bold and daring poetry, kind of celebrating sensual love. So sometimes, he was kind of ostracized a little by certain groups, but he was a great influence on Hungarian poetry. And he himself was influenced by a lot of, by French symbolism, especially the French poets Baudelaire and Verlaine. In fact, Baudelaire was the one who translated Edgar Allan Poe into French. That is just for a little information. And this little house you see here, which is Andre Adi, even now, if visitors go, it seems actually visit the house. I have not been to Hungary, so I wouldn't know, but that's what, Professor Mari also says. She's a very good friend here. I would love to just read a few lines from Andre Adi's poem. It is one of his most popular and beautiful poems. It is called Autumn Passed Through Paris. Adi says, autumn slipped into Paris yesterday, came silently down Boulevard Saint-Michel, in sultry heat, past boughs, sullen and still, and met me on its way. As I walked on to where the Seine flows by, you all know that the river Seine goes through Paris. So he says, as I walked on to where the Seine flows by, little twig songs burned softly in my heart, smoky, odd, somber, purple songs. I thought they sighed that I shall die. This is just part of the poem. And it is very obvious why I'm coming to that. In fact, Radnothi's exposure also before World War II, when he visited Paris, he had a lot of exposure to modernism, to surrealism, founded by André Breton, to Cubism, which is supposed to be the antecedent of so many art forms. He got a lot of exposure. The only problem is, at that time, he was very disturbed by certain illogical and alarming events in Europe, like Nazism and fascism. And at that time, I put a little photograph here of the then Prime Minister, who was totally with the Germans, with the Nazis, and they were all anti-Jews, and the Jews were being tortured, thrown out, literally being humiliated. And even though Radnoti, had converted finally to Christianity, not because of the problem, he always, had embraced a lot of Christianity. It is evident in his poems, but he could finally convert only in 1943. But he realized that he will not be spared by that government. And this is one poem again, I've taken a few lines. He calls it, In a Garden on God's Hill. He knew of his imminent death. He says, and you, young man, what death is waiting now for you? Is that insectile buzz the bullet's sound? Or will you, smashed and scattered by a bomb, be plowed into the dark beneath the ground? So this is already, he was writing so young, before the World War. And as I said, despite the fact that he was Jewish, his poems had a lot of Christian imagery, and he used very beautiful, unique expressions, which would actually link the sacred to the secular, to the temporal. And it is, something very amazing. And another reason perhaps for me to choose Hungarian poetry, it was, imagine, his mathematics professor who first identified the writer in, Radnoti, and he encouraged him to continue writing his poetry. In fact, his poems are a beautiful and intelligent amalgam of lyrics and imagery both. And of course, he wrote on traditional themes also, as well as a lot of avant-garde themes. Now, here are the lines just to share with you. In in the year 2011, I first fell upon these lines as part of an essay that I was reading. And that is where I discovered Radnoti. And then I started reading more of him and more of Hungarian poetry. These lines touched me so much. I'll just read them out. He says, without commas, one line touching the other, I write poems the way I live, in darkness, blind, crossing the paper like a worm. Flashlights, books, the guards took everything. No mail, only fog drifts over the barracks. In fact, it is known from reliable sources that in the early 1940s, Radnoti was conscripted by the Hungarian army. And because he was Jewish, he was assigned to an unarmed battalion that was sent to the border in Ukraine. Now, when Hungary started retreating, that was in May 1944, they were not sent back to Hungary. They were then sent to the copper mines in Bor, Serbia. And imagine they had to sometimes, work in the mines, digging with their bare hands, and the kind of humiliation, the kind of pain that they were subjected to. So why these lines touch me so much? It is so amazing that in those miserable conditions, at such a young age, he was, still penning poems in a small notebook that he kept in his pocket, coat pocket or raincoat pocket. And also he was, he had some scraps of paper which he kept with him, and he kept writing poetry. In fact, I think all of us know, in 1944, 4 lakh Hungarian Jews, it's almost 4,40,000, they were locked in transit camps in inhuman conditions, and they became victims of mass massacre. In November 1944, this battalion, because the Hungarian army started retreating, I think when the Russians attacked, so they were asked to march to central Hungary. They were bone tired. They had, they were exhausted. They were being beaten up. So many, atrocities were being committed on them, which are obvious through Radnoti's poems. In fact, they record, and reflect a lot of the atrocities and the Nazi barbarism. So that is why, 20th century literature has embraced all his poems, because his poems are a record of, the Nazi barbarism committed. And one thing more that I wanted to say, that's why I mentioned it here, but during this forced march, all the men died, including Hungary, and they were buried in a, mass grave at a place near the village of Abda. And this statue is actually somewhere at Abda. Later on, even the statue was destroyed. There's a lot of mystery and story behind it, but they were all in a mass grave, but this was somewhere in northwestern Hungary. And after 2 years, when his body was exhumed, that notebook, black notebook, was discovered by his wife, Fanny, in his raincoat pocket. And the last compositions, these are a few lines from one of those compositions. They were actually so touching, so bone-chilling. And that is how a lot of, they got to know a lot of facts about the conditions that they were, or whatever atrocities that they were, that were inflicted upon them. And then another amazing fact, his friend, who was a violinist, but before that, I think I'll take up this poem, Raz Glenisas. It also tells us a lot. Again, a few lines from that poem. Raz Glenisas is actually a Serbian word which means picture postcard. So, how this innocent poet's world was toned down, totally destroyed by a meaningless war. In fact, each line here is a kind of manifestation of the Nazi atrocities. So I'll just read them. He says, bloody saliva drips from the mouth of oxen. Everywhere the men are passing blood. The foul flood of the century flows by. or stands in stinking piles to watch us die. You know, these men, they were loaded on ox carts and then taken to a place where they were asked to dig their own grave. And then they were, you know, mass buried in these shallow graves. So the kind of torture, especially for people like Radnoti, you know, so qualified, you know, almost a scholar. And I think each line here, as I've written down, is a manifestation of that tortured soul. Of course, he had a humane core. And it is a touching testament of the futility of wars and the horrors of the Holocaust, of which Radnoti already had a premonition. And then, what does it tell you? We say all humans are equal, but I think that is totally shattered because, you know, this is an illusion for me, at least, whenever I read Radnoti, especially his last compositions, and whenever we visit the Holocaust period. In fact, I've taken a quote from George Orwell here. You're all familiar with George Orwell. He says, history stopped in 1936. After that, there was only propaganda. He was speaking of that era of the ruthlessness and the ruthless media strategies of Hitler, one of the greatest man murderers of history, if we can say that. And it is so sad that Radnoti became a victim of that half-baked, warped ideology of this man, the mass murderer, as we say. And, you know, the whole Holocaust was what? It was a consequence of notions, absolute warped notions, or notions that were a complete antithesis of rationalism. And these are the people, especially the Jews, Hungarian Jews, of course, as far as Hungary is concerned, they were, you know, actually, I would say, very sad and cruel victims, or victims of a cruel history, if I can put it that way. Then, coming to his friend he was a violinist player, you know, violin player. The violinist friend was shot dead in front of Radnoti because when they found that the men are too weak to walk, so they will just shoot them dead. And he died before Radnoti. And the first 500 were killed. The next 500, Radnoti came under the third, I think, category, or the third set of 500. It is so sad. So this poem is dedicated to his friend. Same name they share, you know, part of the name, Miklos Lorsi. And the poem is called Postcard 4. He says, I fell next to him. His body rolled over. It was tight as a violin string before it snaps. Shot in the back of the head. This is how you will end. Just lie quietly, I said to myself. Patience flowers into death now. Dark, filthy blood was drying on my ear. So I think it is his words that, you know, survive as eyewitnesses to his unending agony. And that is why I feel that his loss was much more poignant, because he had to suffer all this before his own death, which came soon after. And then this is, why do I call it a poet's victory over fate? Because each time I read Radnoti, wondering that in that war-torn scape, I mean, it was a ghostly black period, and these men had almost reached the, the limiting point of human endurance. But in those conditions, in the last few months of his life, how could he pen poetry? And here in these lines, you see there is an earnest wish for a better death. Imagine he's thinking of at least, you know, death is imminent, but he's thinking of a better death. He's thinking of his wife. So he calls it Forced March. It was penned in 1944, September. And he says, you are crazy. You fall down. These are just part of his poems. Stand up and walk again. Your ankles and your knees shake, but you start again as if you had wings. And then he says, and if someone asks why, maybe you turn around and say that a woman and a sane death, a better death, wait for you. So he was remembering his wife, Fanny, young wife whom he had left. And there is this poem, again, you know, a letter to my wife. It's a long poem, but I've just taken these few lines. Especially I love the last line of the poem, where I felt that, you know, the boundaries of truth and emotion, they become amorphous, you know, very fuzzy. So the poem is called Letter to My Wife, where he says, silence roars in my ears and I keep on crying, crying for help. But from Serbia, stunned by war, no one can give me an answer, and you are far away. The sound of your voice becomes entwined with my dreams. And he says in the end, for you, I have already traveled the length of the soul. That line, you know, is so beautiful and, you know, so touching. It touches the core of one's heart. I think I'll change the mood a little and come back to some of Radnoti's earlier poems. His love poems are very notable, and Fanny, his wife, was actually his childhood sweetheart. So, you know, they did get to spend some time together, some years together. And he, in this poem, In Your Arms, you know, the luminosity of this universal emotion of love, sometimes I felt, you know, was so deeply, present in the poet's mind. Again, 4 lines I've taken from the poem In Your Arms, where he says, I sleep in your arms, it is quiet. In your arms, even the great silence of death cannot scare me. In your arms, I will survive death. It is a dream. And I felt that if death can be a dream, so, you know, the consciousness of the emotion of love in the poet's mind, I think, was fathomless, you know, the way he expressed it. And, you know, earlier than that, when he was much younger, he also wrote a lot of nature poems. But besides that, very understandably, you know, there was a nascent energetic sexuality that we could make out, you know, from his poems, and he had it in him. And there was an exuberant excitement in some of his poems. And this is one of the poems. The name itself is called Whistle with the Wind. This was penned in 1931. Of course, much before the World War started. And he says, again, 2 lines, now let delight run back to its tree root. Decorate your smile for love in the fawn's eye mirror. Whistle with the wind. So, you know, the love aspect of Radnoti, and I'm slowly approaching the conclusion. And, you know, in one of his, referring to his nature poems, he had, in one of his last publications called Calendar, he had written 12 short poems, 1 poem each for each month. And this is the December consciousness that I've chosen. And again, just 4 lines. Why this line? If you see the last line, it actually reminds you of Keats. Keats' poem to Autumn. You know, he celebrated autumn, and he soon died. He died of consumption, as we know. So basically, he resigned to death after penning that poem. And here in December Consciousness, because we have to remember, all the while that he was writing these poems, he was already, you know, the authorities were already pro-Nazi, pro-fascist, and he was totally under the ruthless scanner of, you know, the authorities. So he knew that, you know, he will not survive for too long. So in this poem for December, he says, snow falls through the night, an angel sough in the gloom, silent through the drifting snow, death in its nakedness strides. So again, you know, the death comes into his poem, and that is all that I wanted to quote about Radnoti. And I think to conclude, I would just say that, you know, his poems have always remained a force, especially because of the plural themes, you know, that he embraces. It is not possible. He had quite a few books before, of course, he was conscripted by the army. And it is not, you know, this is just a glimpse. It's impossible to have Radnoti, you know, in such a short time. But, you know, he always remained, he was a revered figure in death as well as in life, because he's been an inspiration to, the, you know, generations. He has influenced many poets because they kept wondering that how through such a short span of life, he could actually celebrate, you know, so many springs and limitless summers and all the seasons. And of course, through his written word, he continues to survive with dignity, if we can say. And from my side, I would just say that as we, whenever a tribute is given to him, in fact, I had mentioned that he was in a mass grave and the body was exhumed after 2 years, but later, to give him respect, actually, he was reinterred in another cemetery, the Kerepesi cemetery in Budapest. So, he is in Budapest now. And I think I would just say that the sun never set in Radnoti's life. I think it appears again and again through various, in auspicious periods. And we, the poets, we are keeping him alive. And I would like that to continue. So I would say in auspicious rebirths, Radnoti comes to us again and again. Thank you so much for giving this time. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure with you.
Thank you, Dr. Rita Malhotra, for that masterly, scholarly, and very touching and moving talk and presentation, and for taking us through the poetry, lyrics, and the imagery of Hungarian poetry during the Holocaust, with special reference to Miklos Radnot. I hope I got his name right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and especially his tribute to his friend. Again, his name was, I think, Miklos Lord.
Lorshi, yes.
Moving and touching. And thank you so much for this.
Thank you for the privilege.
Yeah, truly illuminating and truly enlightening talk and presentation, which makes us all go to the Hungarian poetry immediately to know more about it. In fact, if you go through the chats, you will find that somebody has even requested. I think my friend Hema Ravi has requested you for links.
So sure.
Share those links so that all of us can, learn some more about Hungarian poetry. Thank you very much, Dr.
Sure,
are you in a mood to read your own poem now, or shall I?
No, not after Radnoti.
Okay.
And moreover, I have already
invite you.
I've already said so much. I would love to listen to my poet friends.
No, we want to hear your own poetry also.
Later, if we have time. In the end, if we have time, I will.
No. Immediately after. Okay. I think you need to rest also a little bit, relax your vocal cords a little bit. So I'd now invite our Chief Advisor of Poetry India International, Dr. Ramakant Das, to please read his poem. But before that, here's his brief biography. Dr. Ramakant Das worked as the Joint Secretary in the Parliament of India. He has 8 poetry collections to his credit. He has edited 1 book of poems that contains poems of 55 poets from Odisha writing in English, in original English. He has also written a legislative biography of Biju Patnaik, the famous freedom fighter and statesman of India. He, along with Dr. Jacob, was a tour de force behind the World Congress of Poets held in Bhubaneswar in October 2019. At this event, he was conferred the honors of Poet Laureate and also an honorary doctorate by the World Academy of Arts and Culture. Over to you, Dr. Ramakant Das. Please read your poem.
Thank you, Padmaja. I'll be very quick. I'll very quickly read my poem. But before I read my poem, I must thank the General Secretary of PII, who has selected a wonderful galaxy of poets for this evening's program. I'll be very quick. The poem is The Last Autumn. There has been reference to autumn on many occasions by Rita ji. So I have selected a poem, The Last Autumn. This poem occurs in my second collection of poems, The Grass Flower. In the mellowed stillness of the autumnal wilderness, the last skinny leaf of an ancient oak fluttered silently and nosedived into the icy ground of the ultimate harbinger. During an autumnal twilight, the storm of argument between the musician and the lyricist over what music and diction would constitute my dirge got settled like the leafy sediments at the bottom of a teacup. I stood denuded at the prominent crossroads with my eyes raised upward, as eternity descended onto my open palms with the silence of a benediction upon my life's last autumn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ramakant Das. Last autumn was truly wonderful. And let eternity listen on your poetry always, so that your poetry continues forever and ever and keeps, regaling us with your poetry. I now invite, Rita, would you like to read your poem now?
Later. Padmaja, you continue.
Oh,
Please.
right. I now invite poet Sangeeta Gupta to please read her poem. But before that, I'll hasten. Here are a few insights from her very interesting bio. Sangeeta Gupta, an acclaimed poet, artist, and filmmaker, and recently retired as the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax. Be careful, folks. Has worked as advisor, finance and administration at Lalit Kala Academy, the National Academy of Visual Arts. She has to her credit 35 solo exhibitions of paintings and 20 published books, including 12 poetry collections in Hindi and English, besides being translated into several languages. Sangeeta Gupta has participated in several top literary festivals like the Jaipur Lit Fest, World Hindi Conference, World Congress of Poets, and many more. Her poems, many of them accolades and prize winners, have been published in several leading print magazines, poetry anthologies, and e-journals. Over to you, poet Sangeeta Gupta. Please read your poem.
Thank you, Padmaja, for your generous words. Thank you so much. And I would read a poem. This poem I had written originally in Hindi about a friend who was very sick, and I could not, because of my pressing demanding job, I could not go and take care of the friend. Recently, last year, I was in Toronto and I was asked to, do the English part of it because the poster had the Hindi poem. So there was nobody else and I was forced to translate that because people are suffering now, and COVID has, taken away so many friends, and half of them are already in the hospitals. So I would dedicate this poem to all my friends who are suffering or going through a very low phase of life. Since I heard that you are unwell, since I heard that you are unwell, I have been thinking I must brush aside all essential, non-essential concerns of the world. Sit by your bedside in silence. Sit by your bedside in silence. Absorb all your discomfort. Softly kiss your eyes with the tips of my fingers. Fill them with kisses of sound sleep. Scribble on each of your hair, each of my unsaid poems. Touch you with the glances. Touch you with my glances in such a way that each pore of your skin gets filled with peace. Hide my blessings under your feet. Hide my blessings under your feet in a way that you experience comfort in a split of a second. I wish to sit by your bedside in silence. Since I heard that you are unwell, I have been thinking.
Such wonderful poetry. Sit by the bedside of a sick person. It's such a lovely thought. And it's so good for the sick person also, like you're passing on energy to the other person. And really, your poem is very energy giving, Sangeeta Gupta. And thank you so much for your wonderful poem. I now invite Dr. Jacob Isaac, Senior Advisor of Poetry India International, to please read his poem. But before he commences, here's his brief biography. Dr. Jacob Isaac an internationally acclaimed English poet, writer, and educationist, is the founder of 2 educational institutions in South Africa, making significant contributions in educating and shaping the minds of the young men and women in the post-apartheid South Africa as an educational entrepreneur. He is the recipient of numerous prestigious awards and honors at the state, national, and international levels as a poet and as an educationist. Dr. Isaac is currently an executive board member of the World Academy of Arts and Culture, approved by the UNESCO, that organizes the prestigious World Congress of Poets annually at different geographical locations. In 2019, incidentally, it was held at Bhubaneswar, India. Over to you, Dr. Jacob Isaac. Please read your poem.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Patty, all the office bearers. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you. I presume get up and get loud. Get up and get loud. The title of the poem, Here Am I, the Carnival. The Carnival. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Here am I. Here am I. Here am I, the carnival. Stressless, colorless, conditioning features of rights, capturing features of rights, conditioning features of rights. I'm the carnival, nurturing source of convictions, flame of alerting notions, smiling rituals of the forehead of space, inhibit inner trials of my attention, spinning real mood, reversal my faith, splitting my speedy changes and signals of feeling and feeding of core space in process of stigma, forefathers attitude, process of stigma, forefathers attitude, proving the phrases of hearsay and pride. Here am I, the carnival, reliable, remarkable, strengthening features of grace, strengthening features of grace. I am the rights and claim, fame and frame, language of mood, traces and proximity, knocking the sleepy feud of compensation, kicking the hiding spark, mood swing of mate, fate of the day, numbness and drowsy, call it a day. Mood swing of mate, fate of the day, numbness and drowsy, call it a day. I'm the carnival. I am the furious nightingale, humming the serious temple of health, nature and naming the father of hope. Deem it my duty, let people enjoy. Rating eventually, praising my tips. I'm the carnival. I'm the carnival, stressless, colorless, conditioning features of rights, capturing features of rights. Here am I, here am I, here am I, the carnival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jacob Isaac. I'll pick up a word from your own poem, remarkable. And that's precisely what your poem was, remarkable.
Remarkable.
Yes, of course. You said remarkable and reliable, and which is what your poetry is. And that's what, and the way you read it, it was very evocative and very inspiring. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacob Isaac. Friends, we are very delighted and honored to have in our midst Tushar Kabir from our neighboring country, Bangladesh. Before I request him to read his poem, here are a few lines in introduction about him. Tushar Kabir is a much awarded, prolific and prominent bilingual poet in English and Bangla, a newspaper columnist, essayist, and a management professional with 13 books to his credit. He is vibrantly engaged in writing poetry and is committed to creating image-based poetry and developing distinct poetic diction. Over to you, poet Tushar Kabir, all the way from Bangladesh. Thank you so much. Please read your poem. Tushar Kabir.
Thank you very much, dear Pandiji, and I would like to thank everybody from the Poetry India International. This is indeed a grand gala occasion, and this is my immense pleasure to participate in that grand occasion. And I must acknowledge Dr. Sigma Satish, who has invited me. And finally, I also like to thanks Dr. Rita Malhotra for presenting such a wonderful presentation regarding Hungary poetry. And I would like to say in Bengali, Dhonnobad, Obhinondon o Shubhecha, Dr. Rita Malhotra.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am reading one of my poetry, namely Ventilator. This has been written at the time of lockdown, where I saw that many people died in the ICU bed and by affecting COVID-19, and they died by connecting a ventilator. So I am reciting my poem Ventilator. Wind is calling me into a city of death, where ghost and shadow walks together under the mask-worn blue sky. Listen, before connecting a ventilator, let me kiss on my baby's cheek. Let me see what flower beside the window. Let me sleep my last sleep, hearing the violin tune. On my grassy grave, beneath the tiny valley, keep some torn pages from my poetry book. Also keep a cut golab on the COVID soil. Wind is calling me into a city of death, where the crying tune vanished away in a serene, silent ventilator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, poet Tushar Kabir. In fact, the thoughts of a COVID patient were ventilated through the ventilator that you spoke of. You know, what a nice way to ventilate the thoughts, and you have made it reach our heart. You know, your words have reached our heart. Thank you so much for your interesting poem. I now invite Dr. Sigma, the General Secretary of Poetry India International, to please read her poem. But before that, here's her brief bio. Dr. Sigma, currently the HOD English at the VTM NSS College, Trivandrum, and the General Secretary of Poetry India International, has her own 4 poetry collections to her credit, besides a couple of co-authored and co-edited books. A recipient of several prestigious awards, Dr. Sigma is regularly invited as a poet delegate to several prestigious national and international poetry festivals. Over to you, Sigma. Please read your poem.
Hi all. I have a small poem for you. Title of the poem is My Weapon, My Only Weapon. When memories unfold, my spirit evoking serene nature, someone asked how big roads became narrow and meadows smelt dewy grass. My thoughts hit sky. I had only ink to register hues of nature. Words fell from you to eternity, which mushroomed my sensuous senses. I threw myself into mocking mysteries of flora. Since then, I have been wondering how to survive. I waited to live in lush greenery. Now I grew barren like Mother Earth. I lost abruptly, like a shell in the sand, searching for an ink bottle, my only weapon. Thank you so much.
I think as poets, Sigma, we all would have related to your the one weapon that you spoke of, our pen, one weapon that we all have to write. Thank you so much for this very interesting poem, Sigma. I now invite a very senior poet, U. Atreya Sharma, to please read his poem. But before that, here are a few words in introduction about him. U. Atreya Sharma is a much awarded and a widely published, renowned writer and poet in English and Telugu. He is the editor of Muse India, a bi-monthly English e-journal since 2009. A freelance editor since 1997, he has collaborated on, edited or translated 18 books, besides having a poetry collection of his own to his credit. Between 2013 to 18, he ran a weekly column Wordsmith in the Hunts India, the well-known English daily. Over to you, poet U. Atreya Sharma. Please read your poem.
Padmaja?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Can I have a clarification, because I am a bit mixed up whether I have to read out my Telugu poem or English poem. I got mixed up between the two events.
Okay.
Hello?
English.
English. Okay. You please excuse me. You please give the opportunity to somebody else. In the meantime, just I would like to search one of my English poems, right?
Sure. Would you like to read your poem, Rita, now? Can I request Rita Malhotra to please read a poem? Because anyway, her bio, everything is well known to us.
Yeah, okay. Only thing is, Padmaja, can you hear me?
Sure. All of us can hear you.
Yeah, because I have it here on my laptop, so I'll just read it from there.
Sure.
I hope it, it doesn't seem too long for you all. This was actually recently, there's a Kali project going on women's writings. So they invited some poems from Indian women writers, who write. And I don't know whether you know or not, but I am one of, usually my angry poems are about the exploitation of the girl child, or, I have a series of such poems. So, it is called Molki. I don't know whether you heard, but I think the poem will make it clear what is a Molki or a paro. A Molki, and within brackets, for a male heir. Molki for a male heir. Sold from village to village, man to man. It is business as usual. Carnal pleasure betrays the play of emotions, as the primate in every hymn grazes across pastures of blind lust. Time has crossed to the other side of reason. Emptiness circles her huddled self by the dying wood fire in a thatched, dilapidated dwelling, amidst acrid smoke and garbage stench. Her body is her only sin, every inch under the scanner, the soul torn out of her being. She is labeled a molki, a paro, a trafficked bride for a male heir. Religion of humanity shamed, another history subsumed in its rubric, steps into a retrograde phase. The visceral anxiety for her little girls, born 4 in a row, traps her in the claustrophobic cobweb of misplaced notions. The virus plays no role here. Only primeval convictions thrive in heavy debt of compassion, in the overflowing urn of gloom. Was that really the Shivalinga she worshipped from girlhood to womanhood, or merely a piece of rock? Else, why would those intense prayers for a Shiva-like husband lead her to the wolf's den? In her silent pain is heard a soul-wrenching call. Draupadi, I beg you to circumscribe me. Call her a paro or a molki. Her only mask is the metaphorical burqa of primal fear as days sink in deep despair. Haunting visions of phantom nights leave brutal scars on the skin of a mortified sun. skies stay shrouded in grey monochrome. A stranger even to the ground she treads upon, her mute screams of protest drown in voiceless echoes, drown in the deep abyss of a menacing dark silence, dissipate in seismic tremors of an alien time. All tomorrows trace a question mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rita Malhotra. And again, to borrow a word from your own poem, that was truly heart and soul wrenching. The poem was truly heart and soul wrenching.
Part of me.
Yes, yes. All of us, all of us can identify, and the plight of a paro or a molti is truly, truly, truly so, condemnable, I must say. It is there, it's a reality. Now, can I request Atreya Sharma Garu to please read his English poem? Please unmute.
Sure. Thank you, Padmaja, for clearing my confusion. And yes.
No worries.
Okay. And the title of my poem is The Rape of Nature. No place to sit on at the hilly lake. It is mauled by glass splinters with a brunt. The yawps wantonly to the bottle break. Few after downing the booze with a stunt. Lighter to bring, heavier back to take. The goons grab and defile every lakefront, and raise buildings in a thick bed of graft, shrinking the poor lakes with their wily craft. Hey, not are spared even the rocky chains. The land sharks raise them to the ground from view by blasting their entrails out grain by grain, wreck their aquifers, flora, fauna too, reducing everything to a drab plain. We can always dig a fresh lake, it is true. Can we build a hill with its signature? Damn this suicidal rape of nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Atreya. And we all share that concern for nature and, where the urban sprawl is becoming really a concrete jungle and, the reality of today. Thank you so much for that wonderful poem. I now invite Kalai Mamani Andal Priyadarshini, the Joint Secretary of Poetry India International, to please read her poem. But before that, here are a few lines in introduction about her very impressive bio. I am just taking a few lines from her bio. Kalai Mamani Andal Priyadarshini, till recently the head of the Doordarshan Kendra Puducherry, that is Pondicherry, is a poet, orator, novelist, and short story writer. She has over 70 books of various genres of poetry, short stories, novels, columns, and articles to her credit. Several of her books are a part of the curriculum in many colleges in Tamil Nadu. Andal Priyadarshini is the recipient of many top literary awards. The Tamil Nadu government's highest civilian honor for literature, the Kalai Mamani Award. Over to you, Kalai Mamani Andal Priyadarshini. Please read your poem.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paddy, and a great vanakkam to all the poets from all across the country and the neighborhood also. My congratulations on this second edition of Poetry India International. I have a poem called Nothing to Complain. Usually, most of us have the habit of counting our instead of counting our blessings, we always count our negative ones only. We always have complaints about life, about everything. So during this pandemic period, I wrote this poem, Nothing to Complain, looking at the surroundings. So it's a simple poem. We can relate to it very easily. Nothing to complain. There is nothing to complain except today is 200% replica of the dull yesterday.
Very true.
There is nothing to complain except time passes, brushing 32 teeth and sanitizing hands 100 times a day and yawning the whole day. There is nothing to complain except relatives watch from distance and bid farewell to the deceased wrapped in plastic covers and rolled into pits in graveyards. There is nothing to complain except once far-fetched death is now a close reality. There is nothing to complain except we exist without sharing the warmth of our palms to dear ones. There is nothing to complain except we need to obtain NOC for giving a small, tiny, lightning kiss. There is nothing to complain except we need to apply online. There is nothing to complain except we need to apply online with Aadhaar card for giving a motherly hug. There is nothing to complain except a roof over our head, latest films on Netflix and Amazon, Ramayan on Doordarshan, 3 times home food, afternoon nap, and air-conditioned sleep. There is nothing to complain except watching on YouTube a family rushing out for free food, palm-sized shelter, and untorn clothes. There is nothing to complain except work from home is strenuous, deduction is salary is strenuous. There is nothing to complain except watching silent rag pickers, silent road sweepers, silent housemates. There is nothing to complain. There is nothing to complain. And there is nothing to complain. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Wonderful poem, my dear friend Kalemamani Andal Priyadarshini. You have held a mirror, nothing to complain. You have held a mirror to a current reality that all of us are placed in. And you have beautifully, tinged your poem with a bit of humor, with a bit of satire and a bit of reality that is, that we are all facing today. Thank you very much for that beautiful poem. I now invite another Joint Secretary of the Poetry India International, Mr. Gopal Lahiri, to please read his poem. But before that, here's a very brief bio of his. Gopal Lahiri is a Kolkata-based bilingual poet, critic, editor, writer, and translator. He writes in English and Bengali with 21 published books to his credit, 13 in English and 8 in Bengali, including 3 jointly edited books. His poetry is also published across various anthologies, as well as in eminent national and international journals. His poems are translated into 10 languages. Over to you, poet Gopal Lahiri. Please read your poem.
Thank you, Paddy, for your introduction. It's a very short poem, comparatively. The title of the poem is Grandma's Mirror. A few more wrinkles in her eyes. Grandma loves the concave mirror. Her own unstuffy landscapes fall in love again and again, stirring up within the fear and exhilaration like a good roller coaster. There is a strong sense of the memories collapsing into one another. Some are joyous, some worrisome. Blend the mid-century elements that gradually settle into the rhythm of those unconnected days. Out at the distance, the afternoon sun casting soft shadows on the leafy guava tree. Grandma is in her starched, crisp white sari with red border, applying the vermilion along the part of the hair, blissfully cut off from the rest of the world. Looking for the bitter leaf and claw, she is in her own private heaven before the floor mirror in search of forgotten, isolated paradise. Thank you.
Thank you, poet Gopal Lahiri. In fact, all of us have our own grandmothers, and so thank you for taking back to our own childhood memories about our own grandmother. And really, and we are all also becoming grandmothers sooner or later. I've already become one. So, this is a very beautiful memory. I hope my granddaughter writes something about me. So this is a wonderful poem that way, it was, nostalgia filled. So I like your poem very much. I now invite another very prolific poet, Neelam Saxena, to please read her poem. But before that, here's a glimpse into her very impressive profile. Neelam Saxena, bilingual poet, short story writer, and novelist in English and Hindi, with over 55 published books to her credit, is the recipient of such prestigious awards as the Sohanlal Dwivedi Puraskar 2018 for children's literature and many more, and is a Limca Book of Records holder as the author with the highest number of publications in a single year. A qualified engineer with management qualifications in finance from the London School of Economics and a senior Indian Railway Service officer, she is currently the additional divisional railway manager, Pune, Maharashtra. She was listed in Forbes as one amongst the 78 most popular authors in the country in 2014. Over to you, poet Neelam Saxena. Please read your poem.
Thank you so much, Paddy. And I thank everybody for providing me the stage. And it was indeed a pleasure to listen to you, all of you. So the poem which I'll be presenting today is titled To My Daughter. I sometimes wish I was the best mom in the world, with no fault lines even in my dreams, having no aspirations of my own, no desire to see anyone but you, no wish to think of anyone but you, to keep on holding your fingers as you walk towards your future. But I certainly am not that mom. I'm rather a mom with a lot of weaknesses. I'm rather a mom with a lot of weaknesses, which I'm sure taught you to understand that no one is perfect. And you too will not be perfect. If someone points your mistakes to you, you know that you can simply smile. I do have aspirations in life, even at my age, which I'm sure will make you comprehend that one should never give up in life and keep dreaming and dreaming till the day you die. I do think and desire to meet my well-wishers, which, when you analyze, will make you think that it's necessary in life to have friends, to not only break the monotony in life, but also gather those drops of enthusiasm, which, like nectar, gives one a new life every time. I've always known that practice is better than precept. So rather than holding your fingers, I leave you to face life little by little. I'm sure that when you see me struggling for every little inch of space in my life, I'm sure that you know that nothing comes easily and you have to toil your way to success. I don't know what kind of mom I am, but the glint of happiness that I see in your eyes when you meet me makes me sure every time that I am not wrong. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Neelam Saxena. That was a wonderful poem. And none of us know what sort of moms we are. And probably this is what our moms also felt at some point of time in our life when, you know, they were hand-holding us. And I think every mother, you know, has this, constant question whether she's a good mother or not. But I think we are all good mothers, of course, like our moms were. So thank you so much for that very relatable poem. Thank you so much. I now invite Niladri Mahajan to please read his poem. But before that, here are a few insights about him. Niladri Mahajan, a PhD scholar, a multiple international awards winning and a widely translated bilingual poet in English and Bengali, has 2 poetry collections to his credit. He's an avid street photographer, watercolor artist, and an afternoon walking, scuba diving, and gliding enthusiast. Over to you, Niladri Mahajan, poet Niladri Mahajan. Please read your poem.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to read my poem, The Darbar Square, Kathmandu. This poem is written recollecting my memories from Nepal.
Okay.
The Darbar Square, Kathmandu. This space with the unbroken shadows of the past, some recent and of future, an acrid sun in morning is panning out. The Darbar Square is opening like a light's entrance through the circumferences of a silent spring in dark room, from photonegatives developing in form. The colors, the people, the passages, the buildings, the shops, and suddenly the luminance of freshly brewed tea, like the Tibetan scriptures flanked in fire, the hidden cognition of every Buddha statue. Peace, peace, and peace. Standing there in this place can remind you the white lotuses of Thankas, the fleeting meanings of a race of our land, and exquisite gold-plated faces of deities all sleeping, with the consciousness aroused therein, with dreaming contours of earth, the young lovers sitting there holding their hands, some foreigners, the hawkers with incense burners, children and flowers, the radiant sun. You can't walk through but struggle in your presence wherever you are there. The blood in your veins will this indelible expanding universe refluencing as the vibrations of singing bowls, the solemn evening of chants, sufferings, this birth and of death. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, poet Niladri Mahajan. So Niladri Mahajan in Nepal and Nepal in his poem. And thank you, Niladri Mahajan, for taking us to Nepal through your poetry. Thank you very much. We had a tour of Nepal through your poem. I now invite my dear friend Hema Ravi to please read her poem. But before that, a few words and introduction about her. Hema Ravi is a widely published, award-winning poet, author, reviewer, editor, independent researcher, an annual poetry event organizer, and the secretary of Chennai Poets Circle. Featured in several poetry anthologies, print magazines, and e-zines, her poetic thoughts have been featured in the 21st Century Critical Thought, a dialogue with postmodern voices, Volume 1, a collection of interviews by Dr. Jarnail Singh Anand. Over to you, Hema. Please read your poem.
So thank you, ma'am, for your kind introduction, and my sincere thanks to the organizers for this wonderful opportunity. I am a little nervous to read my poem in front of this August gathering. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My poem is titled A New Dawn. It is self-explanatory. Here it goes. A new dawn. When a new directive designates the reticent individual with a mammoth responsibility, is it with a purpose for a higher ideal? When divine intervention brings one into the limelight unexpectedly, is it part of a larger plan that the human mind cannot comprehend? Flowing over rocky hills and verdant tales, gurgling, gushing with life, staccato splashing, orchestrating at times, the river refreshes, rejuvenates, and quenches the thirst of parched souls, stops not until it joins the ocean. The goal is never out of sight. Akin to a watercourse nearing its destination, the best alternative is to accept, move in the direction ordained, amidst all odds without holding back, firmly anchored to the ship of faith, awake to the new dawn, anchored to the ship of faith, awake to a new dawn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hema. That was a very inspiring poem, Awake to a New Dawn, anchored to the ship of faith. Indeed, we need to do that more and more in these tough times. Thank you very much for that lovely poem.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Now it is the turn of our young poet, Srivatsan Nadadur, and our tech support of this event, because we are all here thanks to Srivatsan to read his poem. But before that he starts, here's his brief bio. Srivatsan Nadadur, an independent journalist. By the way, he's an engineer turned journalist, working for publications like The Hindu, Deccan Herald, News Minute, Film Companion, and several other portals. Is an English and Telugu poet with a penchant for Carnatic music. He says that his words are his creative outlet through which he channelizes his fears, hopes, and ambitions constructively. Don't we all do that, poets? So well said, Srivatsan. Over to you now to please read your poem.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the warm welcome. And I was really inspired by the session on Hungarian poetry, and it probably inspired an engineer like me also to step towards literature and probably even study literature in the future. So we are never late. So thanks so much for the warm invitation. So my poem is based on the pandemic, and it's a little about hope and not hope also. So it's titled The Wait for Tomorrow. So here it goes. Is the wait for tomorrow worth it? Is the wait for tomorrow worth it? Will the human touch matter much again? Will all those cuddles still remain virtual? Will all those closed doors open again? Is the wait for tomorrow worth it? Will we board a train with the same glee? Will we board a train with the same glee? Will the flight of hope, where will the flight of hope take us to? Where will the flight of hope take us to? Will the future take us for a ride? Is the wait for tomorrow worth it? Will solitude be deemed a cure for all else? Will solitude be deemed a cure for all else? Will life begin and end with us alone? Will we redefine togetherness? Will we redefine togetherness? Is the wait for tomorrow worth it? Will the uninvited guest still be called a pest? Will the uninvited guest still be called a pest? Will the neighbor be welcome again? Will the neighbor be welcome again? Will a dose of a vaccine make us more human again? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, very contemporary poem, Srivatsan, because it just took us through the times we are living in, and we are all waiting for various doors to open, so that, we can let people in and we can also go out. But right now we are all behind closed doors, waiting with hope.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, that's a beautiful poem. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Is Ritambara Bhattacharya here? Is Ritambara?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Because I didn't see you at all, so I was wondering. Good,
No,
good,
ma'am.
good, good. Yeah. It's now the turn of Ritambara Bhattacharya to please read her poem. But before that, here's a brief introduction about her. Ritambara Bhattacharya writes from a darling's heart, Darjeeling. She believes in what Sylvia Plath said. And by the way, everything in life is writable about if you have the outgoing guts to do it and the imagination to improvise. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt. So well said by Sylvia Plath. Ritambara writes for pleasure, and for that I am in her art, for the I am in her heart. A voice that creates ripples and sensation. Over to you, Ritambara. Now please read your poem.
I hope I'm audible.
You are.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here amongst all of you. And it was a pleasure hearing all of you. So was I mesmerized that I did not speak even a word. So that's the reason I was remaining quiet. Anyway, I just want to read a poem titled Hallelujah, which is written last year during autumn, which is a Thanksgiving poem that is taught to me how nature can make us understand the little joys in our life, which we always overlook. So here is my poem, titled Hallelujah. The leaves in the forest are auburn, ready to play their hysteric charm against the pale sky. Each leaf is carefully plucked, like a belief, then sewed against the path. They lie with wise foreheads to be touched by hurried footsteps. At night, the voluminous heap of leaves resemble graves of many that lie close against each other, licking wounds silently. Some sail. Midnight, narcissus in air, gardens bloom. If ever you had walked an autumn forest at night, if you had wept silently by the solidified water of the lake, if ever you had looked into the eye of a desperate bird willing to remember his home coming song, if ever you had seen the cage of a bird hung open, if ever the crunching of the leaves under your feet seemed music to your ears, if ever you had missed the fire in a firefly's body, if ever you had seen a stag with bold eyes staring at the broad sky, if you have spots of sunshine at my fingertips, look, here it is, what is called hallelujah. Thank you so much.
If there's something called very caressing poetry rendering, I think that was Ritambara's, young Ritambara's. You know, as she read, we felt as if she was caressing poetry. That's beautiful. And the hallelujah to autumn and the joys of little joys of everyday life and the blessings of every day. I think you have, you know, taught us a very nice lesson through your poem, because we all have to value those little joys and the small blessings of everyday life. Thank you so much, young
Thank you,
Ritambara.
ma'am. My heartfelt gratitude.
Our pleasure and honor to have you in our midst. I now, after young Ritambara, it's the turn of another young poet, Milan Srivastava from Hyderabad, my city. And here are a few words about him before he commences his poetry reading. Milan Srivastava is a Hyderabad-based poet, is a Hyderabad-based English, Hindi and Urdu poet and a storyteller as well. He is the founder of the multilingual literary website, www.theblueeyedsun.com, where like-minded artists and writers publish their works. Great work, Milan. Milan's poetry often reflects an existential bent, realistic metaphors, and an urban vocabulary. Over to you now, Milan, to please read your poem.
Thank you, Paddy. This is like overwhelming, and I'm first of all fortunate to be in this august company. And let me just call out to Dr. Rita for introducing me to Ratnoti. Just wanted to tell that Solzhenitsyn and Milosz, two are my favorite writers. I've written a lot about the oppression of that period. So this is one more writer for me to go and explore and probably reflect. Here is my poem. This is about a question that my girl asked me after she saw me silent for almost the whole afternoon. And she asked me, why are you not speaking? What are you thinking about? So I said that I observe and I will write a song. So that's the poem. I'll write a song. I'll write a song for them. A song about me, a song about you, and the passage to us. Like the interstice between the dreams and the dread, from which the yarns of passion are made, in the desolate moments when the morning was far, when the twilight waited for a moon or a star, a song for those moments to the music of dawn. I'll write a song for them. I'll write a song for them. I'll write a song about the river you are. I'll write a song about the river you are, the meadow I am, how you dissect and nourish me all at once. On a boulder of basalt, a tender sapling that breaks it open, yet makes it alive. On a boulder of basalt, a tender sapling that breaks it open, yet makes it alive. Between friction and spirit, only love can survive. For a poem, the wind is writing on the water. I'll write a song for them. I'll write a song for them. I'll write a song for us, for our life, for a promise of this life which is green and so merry, with tulips so slender and lilies so white, on a porch in the sun when I seem all so lost, on a porch in the sun when I seem all so lost, while all I'm thinking is nothing but you. A noon spent swirling like sugar in tea, a noon spent swirling like sugar in tea, a story of finches that flew in the morn, a story for finches that came back to home. I'll write a song for them. I'll write a song for them. Thank you.
Wonderful. We thank your daughter. Her name is Dylan, by the way. We thank your daughter, Dylan, for asking you, why are you so silent? And we wish that you have more silences when you come up with such excellent poetry, Milan. Thank you so much. It's the turn of another scientist who is a scientist by profession and a poet by passion, and my dear friend, Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, to please read her poem. But before that, here are a few words in introduction about her. Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, an internationally renowned poet, has 6 published poetry collections to her credit. A recipient of several national and international awards, she is the founder-president of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, Mumbai chapter. Her poems have been widely published nationally and internationally. Over to you, Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik. Please read your poem.
Firstly, thank you so much, dear Paddy. I love you for a very special reason, and that is you're always so positive, so vibrant, and so encouraging. It's my honor to be here. And thank you very much, Dr. Sigma, for inviting me here. And I'm very honored to be amongst such great people, such great poets. So the poem for today is The Story of Silence. Just give me a moment. The story of silence. Where do I start the story of silence? For yawns and yawns, the scream of silence has pervaded the air. Silence of the slaves being beaten up and burned, then whipped to burst the blisters which were then salted and peppered. Cruelty for the mirth of the slave lords. Silence of the prisoners in the concentration camps, hung upside down to meet their death. Inhumane treatment at the whim of the toothbrushed, mustached man. Where do I start the story of silence? For ages unknown, the shriek of silence has filled the air. Silence when prisoners were burnt alive for the warmth and light of King Nero's guests and their entertainment. Silence when widows were forced to death on the funeral pyre of their husbands for the benefit of the greedy relatives. One day, all silence will break. We will, all perpetrators of cruelty, forsake. All brutality and inhumanity will cease. There will be love and brotherhood, and the world will have peace. Thank you.
They were very powerful sounds of silence, you know. Long back, I've heard a song, you know, Sounds of Silence. I think all of you must have heard it. It's a beautiful song. And the sounds that have come through the silence of mentioned in your poetry is something very heart-wrenching as well as very touching. So thank you so much, my friend Paramita, for this beautiful poem, for this very touching and moving poem. Thank you so much. I now invite poet P.L. Sridharan Parakod to please read his poem. But before that, here's his brief bio. P.L. Sridharan Parakod, and he's the last poet, I think, today. Last but not the least, I must say, is a bilingual poet in English and Malayalam, has nearly 30 poetry anthologies to his credit. Besides having staged plays, he has also written songs for professional dramas, CDs, and animation films. He also writes devotional songs. Poet Sridharan has received honors from various organizations and has presented his poems in Taiwan, Serbia, and China. Over to you, Poet Sridharan Parakod, to please read your poem.
Hi, my dear friends. Thank you for the wonderful occasion, Dr. Sigma and Padiji. Though you don't like it, Padiji, okay. Some of my short poems, I will take 2 or 3 minutes maximum, okay? Family of Poetry, the first one, Family of Poetry. As this house is, with its strong pillars of truth and faith on the one side, and non-violence and tolerance on the other, it will have no decay and would become the abode for all those wish to have. This will be an abode for that. Another one is complaint box. Complaint box. It is not the ink. It is not the ink, but the line in this book made it wrong. So be careful, writers also. Blame may appear at any distance. Blame may appear at any distance. Of life. After all, what is life? Can it be defined as the period from the very beginning to the ultimate end? Doing or not doing, time is spent with a spectator. Anxiety on the stage, we are all watching keenly. The last one, the pillow. It tries to protect the head on it and the stuff it made of. As the mark of satisfaction, it snores with some moments, silence lying stiff at last. And the satirical vein. The buttonholes in the shirts, unable to adjust the buttons, lodge complaints against the ruthlessness of it. Admitting it correct from neck to bottom, needles keep quiet and settles at food courts. And settles the cases at food courts. Thank you. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you, Poet Sridharan. In the limited time given to you, you have taken us through a gamut of, emotions and a gamut of, including silence. Thank you so much for your poem.
Thank you.
And who is the next person to be? I think with that we come to our poetry reading session. End of a poetry reading session.
What about your poetry, ma'am?
Yes, Paddy, we would like to listen to your poems.
Okay. I think Sigma has to.
Yeah. Hello. I'll invite Paddy to recite her poem. Before that, I'll read a short bio. Padmaja Iyengar's maiden poetry collection, Penchants, has been recognized as a unique record of excellence by the India Book of Records. A recipient of several awards, Paddy has compiled and edited 6 international multilingual anthologies, of which Amravati Poeticalism 2016 to 2019 have been recognized by the Limca Book of Records as poetry anthology in most languages. Paddy's articles, short stories, and poems, some of them prize winners, have been published in major anthologies, print journals, newspapers, and e-journals. I welcome Paddy to recite your poem.
Thank you, Sigma, for that nice introduction about me. Much obliged. And here's my very short poem. I think all of you will be able to relate to this poem. It's titled Poetry of the Heart. When a poem emanates from the heart, it very much develops like a work of art. with colors from the wings of many birds that lend themselves to the poet's words. Much like the strokes of an artist's brush, a poem gets nourished by words that rush. To give it a flourish, a structure, and a feel that makes the poem glide on an even keel. When from the heart a poem emanates, into a chain reaction, it often detonates, words exploding with meaning and rhythm, like the colorful rays of light from a prism. Much like the scenario of a pleasant dream, the poem shimmers like a cascading stream when thoughts and feelings poetically unite to weave a seamless tapestry of day and night. Poetry of the heart reaches for the skies in words that touch the soul and are wise. In the poetry of the heart, there are no lies as it lingers on in the psyche and never dies. Thank you very much. I now request the Joint Secretary of Poetry India International, Gopal Lahiri, to please propose a vote of thanks. Because with this, we come to the end of the poetry sessions. I hope I have not missed anyone. Yeah. Over to you, Gopal Lahiri.
Thank you, Paddy, for your wonderful poetry and beautiful conduct of this particular poetry session. And oh, it's almost mind-blowing that this poetry session and the Poets Meet is still all the poems which still lingers in our mind. And I must say that poetry is basically an extension of your life, especially for the poets. He or she is just the extension of life. And here we have we have heard all those beautiful poems which are part of our life. And for that, I first extend my thanks to Dr. Sigma Satish, our General Secretary, PII, for highlighting the celebration of poetry, which he mentions, and taking a cue for this, our Chief Advisor, Dr. Ramakanta Das, also mentioned that poetry we must celebrate, and especially in this time of turbulence or in time of pandemic, only poetry can give us the solace. So it's at the end, poetry should be the winner. And for that, we must be grateful to all the poets. And my thanks also especially for the highlight of this particular session, Dr. Rita Malhotra, for her outstanding talk on poetry in general, and especially she mentions about the trend of the Hungarian poetry. And before we know about this century, the last century, we have 2 world wars were there and the Holocaust. And she mentioned some of the poets of Hungary who are really made their mark, like she mentions Michalis, Audi, Gabor, and Radhanoti. These all are they are outstanding poets, and she also rendered some of the poems, which you can we always feel that that is really, really inspiring, and that will continue. That poems will reverberate all along over the centuries, which I can feel. Even now, after a poem which was written before the Second World War, and now we feel so relevant today. So that is the hallmark of good poetry. So thank you, Dr. Rita, for your excellent talk. And I'm sure that this will be not your last presence. I'm sure she will grace the occasion, especially on PII, or Poetry India International Forum, this platform. She will come again and also will enlighten us on many other poetry of poets of other countries. So thank you very much. We are really indebted to her. And then our poetry session. So I cannot single out anybody as such, because all the poets have read best of their poetry. So thanks, dear poets, you all are rocking here today. So it's excellent, and all the poets, we should not mention anybody. I mean, and you see, it has to be, because all the poets who are present here, they are all quite outstanding poet, and they have already huge experience, and even some younger poets which they have read, they are looking like they are very experienced poet. So that also give really, we are grateful to all these young and eminent and excellent poets. So thank you all the poets. We hope that you will come again and grace us. And finally to Paddy, she's poetry and Paddy is inseparable. I mean, we cannot just separate these two things, because wherever we can see Paddy, and Atroji can vouch us that she will be mentioned only with the poetry. So Paddy ji, thank you very much for your excellent, you are conducting like always as you are, and so, I mean, so affectionate, so beautifully you talk about each and every poet, which really it's very heartrending. And with this, I thank everybody. I hope that you will have a great evening and night today. Thank you very much.
I would like to add one word to that vote of thanks. I think I had messaged you, Gopalji, for that. We all have to thank Srivatsan Nadadur for providing such excellent technical support. But
Oh,
for
yes,
him,
yes.
we would not have been so beautifully connected with each other.
Yes.
A big
Thank you,
Srivatsan Nadadur. Thank you very much for connecting us all, and thank you very much for being the man behind the scenes and ensuring that we all were very nicely and seamlessly in this event. Thank you, Srivatsan.
Could I also thank all of you? I have to thank you, and Padmaja, as I said, she comes out so warmly, so much warmth is evoked. And if you just give me 1 minute, these youngsters, the way they are writing, I mean, my heart goes out, so unique. That little child, Ritamra, I think, as Dr. Larry said, that, you know, it's not pointing out, but certain lines that stay with us, you know, we really feel like even Milan's line where love is between, you know, I couldn't note in, you know, all the poems, but some lines I would love to mention. When he says friction and spirit, between friction and spirit only love can survive. I mean, such lines really, you know, give you so much pleasure. And somebody, I can't remember all of them, but I want to say so much. The leaps of leaves, where this child, Ritamra, says they are like graves, you know, the metaphors that have been used in some of the poems, they were really gave me so much. And Dr. Jacob Isaac, I think I wanted to talk about, did you say colorless carnivals? If it was that, I really loved it, you know. I mean, when he talks of carnivals and then he says colorless carnivals, so certain things, of course, all the poems are beautiful. Even Tushar, I had something for you. I've forgotten, you know, most of them, but I wish we could have a, you know, informal chat, you know, talking about the lovely lines and all. And Dr. Das, of course, I know his poetry very well, but it's not. And Dr. Atre Sharma, please, thank you so much. I got some chat messages. You know, I'm not so e-savvy as all of you are. My age is catching up. So I'm scared to chat, or I'm scared to receive a message. I feel I'm going to lose the connection or something. But so I couldn't reply. And ma'am, Himaji, please, anytime you call, I would love to. It's not only, actually, this is just for information. Somebody mentioned Serbia, because I was there for 2 consecutive years at the Writers Association. Serbian poetry is rich, beautiful, the texture. Actually, Sridharanji, yes. And, you know, I have an essay on their national poet, Vasco Popa. Actually, I have an essay book. It's called A Cultural Journey from East to West. So, you know, essays interspersed with poets, lines from poets across the world, you know. So wherever I visited or wherever I've met people whose lines have touched, I was so happy to listen, you know, hear the word Serbia. I have very fond memories. But thank you. And Himaji, anytime, I think we should have a chat. And I'll give you some names of books also. Moreover, because I'm in touch with Professor Mari from Hungarian, for all you know, she'll give us the latest also, if anything. But a lot has been written about Radnoti, and I have an essay on him also in my book. So that's how, but I wish, and Sigma's poems, I love them. I know I love them because Sigma, recently the 2 poems that you sent me, they were very, very good. I think I mentioned it also to you, but I can't by name remember who read what, but some of the things that I remember. I wish I could note down every poem by name and this thing, but poetry does this to me. So sorry, I just, kind of, took over the mic, no mic, but thank you, Padmaja. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sigma. Thank you, Atraji. I'm meeting so many people for the first time. It's a pleasure. Gopalji, thank you. Thank you so much for your lovely words. But thank you. And Sangeeta is mine.
Thank you, Dr. Rita Malhotra, for so beautifully summing up the, poetry readings. That was a very nice, succinct summation of all the poems that were read here. Thank you.
Next time we have a program, Padmaja, I'm going to be in touch and invite poets from here for our reading. It's poetry across cultures when we have. So I don't know when next. Let's see.
And by the way, in the Tali project, you see Hema's and mine, and I think Andal also.
Yeah, because because we sent the poems and then we got the confirmation. So they've taken 2 or 3 of mine, I think. So that is how I had this poem on the laptop. It was a little long, but then.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Tushar Kabirji, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you so much for being with us.
And Srivatsan, thank you. Yeah, Srivatsan, thank you.
You're always welcome, ma'am.
And he's like a son, he has so much common between my son and him. Both are computer engineers, both are creative in music or poetry. So nice. So we'll be in touch.
We have another computer engineer here, Milan Srivastav also.
Oh, Milan also. Oh my God, all these computer people. Computer science is the in thing. Yes. Yeah, and Milanji and Srivatsan, whenever I give maths talks, I always speak to my son for the latest in artificial intelligence and all, so that, I can put something unique into the talk. So these youngsters have so much to give us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. R.K. Das.
Padmaja, just one word.